In a decades-old cold case in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, officials have named a suspect in the murder of 23-year-old Laura Kempton, a beauty school student who was killed back in September 1981 inside her apartment on Chapel Street.
A police officer walks up to a ground-floor apartment on a quiet residential street. He is not there because anything is wrong. He is there to hand someone a piece of paper, a court summons for unpaid parking tickets. He knocks. Nobody answers. He knocks again. Still nothing. So he does what anyone would do. He steps to the side and looks through the window. And that is when the Saturday morning becomes something else entirely. A young woman is lying on the floor. She is not moving. She is 23 years old. Her name is Laura Kempton. And she has been lying there since the middle of the night alone in her apartment, on the floor, next to a single cigarette, but that the man who killed her smoked all the way down to the filter before he walked out the door. That cigarette but would sit in a sealed evidence bag for the next 42 years. The killer's name was on it the entire time. The science just was not there yet to read it. This is the story of how they finally did. Her name was Laura Kempton. She was 23 years old, originally from Prince Edward Island, Canada, and she had built herself a quiet, independent life on the New Hampshire seacoast. She was studying at the Portsmouth Beauty School, and by the fall of 1981, she was roughly 6 months away from earning her cosmetology license. 6 months away from the career she had worked toward. 6 months away from the rest of her life. To support herself while she finished school, Laura worked 2 part-time jobs at a gift shop called Marco Polo and at Karen's ice cream parlor. Everyone who knew her described the same person. Friendly. Kind. Outgoing. Portsmouth in 1981 was a small, compact coastal city of about 26,000 people, sitting at the southern tip of New Hampshire's short Atlantic coastline. The downtown, a cluster of old brick buildings and narrow streets wedged between the Piscataqua River and the neighborhoods to the west, could be walked end to end in just a few minutes. On a Saturday night in a city that size, every bar and restaurant was within easy reach of every other. On the evening of Saturday, September the 27th, 1981, Laura went out for the night with a friend. The two of them spent the evening at one of the bars downtown. At some point during the night, they split up and went in different directions. Laura walked home alone through the quiet streets, went inside her apartment on Chapel Street, and closed the door behind her. She was 23 years old. She had class on Monday. She had a future ahead of her. She was already dead by Sunday morning. At some point after Laura got home, someone came to her door. He did not find it unlocked. He did not slip in through a window. According to investigators, the man used a mailbox to punch through a panel in the wooden front door, reached his arm through the opening, and turned the lock from the inside. It was a calculated, deliberate breach, the kind of thing someone does when they have done it before, or thought carefully about how to do it. He forced his way into a ground-floor apartment on a quiet residential street in the middle of the night. What happened inside that apartment was documented in full by the medical examiner and the detectives who arrived the following morning. Laura had suffered massive blunt force trauma to the left side of her head, consistent with being struck repeatedly with a glass wine bottle. She had been sexually assaulted. An electrical cord had been knotted tightly around her ankles. A telephone cord was wound around her neck and shoulder area. The official cause of death was massive head trauma, contusions and lacerations of the brain. But it is the injuries on her hands and arms that say the most about what happened in that room. Deep cuts. Dark bruises. Defensive wounds, the kind the body makes when a person is fighting back hard against someone trying to kill them. She fought. The injuries recorded every moment of that struggle, even though she did not survive it. When it was over, the man pulled out a cigarette and smoked it. He smoked it all the way down to the filter. Then he dropped the butt on the floor right next to where Laura was lying. He left the glass bottle behind as well. Both items carried biological material: saliva on the cigarette filter, residue on the bottle. In 1981, none of that evidence could be read by any forensic lab anywhere in the world. When the officer who had come to serve the parking summons looked through the window at around 9:30 on Monday morning, he called for backup immediately. Other officers arrived within minutes. Laura was already gone. The scene told the detectives everything about what had happened inside that apartment. It told them nothing about who had done it. What followed was one of the most extensive investigations in Portsmouth's history and one of its longest cold cases. In the days after Laura was found, detectives canvassed door to door up and down Chapel Street and through every surrounding block. They interviewed her classmates at the Portsmouth Beauty School, her co-workers at both of her jobs, and every single person she had been with on the night of September the 27th. They reconstructed her movements hour by hour, from the moment she left her apartment that evening to the moment she walked back through the front door. The way the door had been forced told investigators something important about who they were looking for. The method to punch through, the reach in, the deliberate unlocking pointed towards someone who had done this kind of thing before. Detectives began pulling records of anyone with a history of burglary or home invasion in Rockingham County and throughout southern New Hampshire and coastal Maine. Hundreds of leads came in from the public over the months and years that followed. Dozens of names were investigated individually and eliminated one by one. A case like this one, a young woman beaten and killed inside her own home, drew enormous attention in a city that size. Tips flooded in from across the entire seacoast region. Detectives followed every single one of them down. None of them led anywhere. Then, just 13 months after Laura was found on the floor of her Chapel Street apartment, Portsmouth police responded to another scene with a devastating sense of having been there before. On October 19, 1982, 20-year-old Tammy Little was found murdered in her apartment at 315 Maplewood Avenue. Like Laura, Tammy was a student at the Portsmouth Beauty School. Like Laura, she lived alone on the ground floor of a downtown apartment building. Like Laura, she had died from massive head injuries. Both women had been regulars at the same downtown bar, the Ranger Club. Both were described by everyone who knew them as friendly, outgoing, and full of life. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Speculation immediately emerged that the two murders were connected, possibly the work of a single killer moving through Portsmouth's downtown neighborhoods. For years, that question would hang over both cases without an answer. By the mid-1990s, the trail on both cases had gone completely cold. The files stayed open at the department, but there was nothing left to work with. Detectives who had been with the Kempton case from the very beginning retired and handed their notes to a new generation. The new detectives read through every statement, every lead, every dead end, and found themselves staring at exactly the same wall. In 1996, the Boston Globe ran a feature on both the Kempton and Little homicides as part of its Unsolved Mysteries series. Investigators were quoted saying they had a number one suspect, a Portsmouth man they had watched closely for years but had no physical evidence to tie him to either crime. That man was never publicly named. And it would eventually emerge that he was not the killer at all. Detectives had been watching the wrong person for years while the right one moved freely through the community. Year after year, the evidence from Laura's case sat untouched in storage. And year after year, the science inched closer to what was waiting inside those evidence bags. By the middle of the 1990s, forensic DNA technology had advanced to the point where biological material that would have been completely unreadable just a decade earlier could now yield results. Detectives assigned to the cold case unit pulled the old evidence out of storage and sent it to the state lab. Scientists were able to develop a male DNA profile from multiple samples from the cigarette butt, from the bedding, and from biological material recovered during Laura's autopsy. Every sample pointed to the same person. One single unknown man had been inside that apartment on the night Laura was killed. The profile was entered into the FBI's National CODIS database, where crime scene DNA is automatically compared against the records of convicted felons across the country. Nothing came back. Whoever this man was, he had never been convicted of a crime serious enough to require his DNA to be collected and entered into the system. The profile sat in the database for years. Every time a new offender's sample was added anywhere in the country, the system automatically ran it against every unsolved case on file. Every single time, for Laura Kempton's case, it came back empty. By 2022, investigators were ready to try something different. The Portsmouth Police Department assembled a task force unlike anything the case had seen before. They partnered with the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory, the Maine State Police Forensic Laboratory, the Attorney General's Cold Case Unit, and a private forensic genealogy firm called Identifinders International. Together, the team uploaded the unknown male DNA profile to several consumer ancestry databases, the same platforms where millions of ordinary people had sent in their own saliva samples to learn about their family history. Then they waited. In May of 2022, Detective Eric Widerstrom received word that the uploaded profile had produced a hit. A distant relative of the unknown man had appeared as a partial match in one of those databases. That relative had ties to Rockingham County, the same county where Portsmouth sits. The match was distant, a connection several generations back. But even that was enough to give the genealogy team a foundation to build from. What happened next took just 3 days. Working through public record census data, marriage certificates, birth announcements, and death records, the genealogy team traced the family lines far enough to identify the parents of the man whose DNA had been found at the crime scene. Those two parents had one child. A single son. No other children to rule in or out. The entire family tree pointed to one person and one person only. There was a problem. The man was already dead. He had died in 2005, nearly 2 decades before the genealogy search even started. There would be no arrest. No knock on the door. No interview across a table in a small room. Investigators would need another way to confirm the match. As it turned out, they had one. During his autopsy in 2005, the medical examiner's office had collected what is known as a blood card, a small preserved sample of a person's blood kept on file as a matter of standard procedure. That card had been sitting undisturbed in a drawer for 18 years. A forensic analyst extracted DNA from the blood card and ran it against the profile developed from the Chapel Street crime scene evidence collected 42 years earlier. The two profiles were a perfect match. The man whose blood was on that card was the same man who had smoked a cigarette in Laura Kempton's apartment and left the butt on the floor right next to her body. His name was Ronnie James Lee. Lee was born in 1960. His mother had moved to Portsmouth in the late 1950s, and when Lee completed his service in the United States Army in May of 1981, he moved in with her at her home on Rock Hill Avenue in the city's north end, about an 8-minute drive, or a 40-minute walk, from the downtown waterfront where Laura Kempton lived. He was 21 years old. In June of 1981, just weeks after leaving the military, Lee took a job as a security guard through MBI Security, stationed at the Liberty Mutual Insurance Building in Portsmouth, just a few blocks from his mother's home. He started that job the same summer Laura moved into her apartment on Chapel Street. Investigators found nothing to connect the two of them personally. No shared friends. No overlapping workplaces. No prior contact of any kind. Ronnie James Lee and Laura Kempton were two people living in the same small city at the same time, moving through the same compact downtown, completely unknown to each other. That was all it took. After the night of September the 27th, 1981, Lee went right on living his life as though nothing had happened. He kept his job at the security firm through August of 1982. In the months that followed, while detectives across Portsmouth were working Laura's case and then Tammy Little's, Lee was involved in 4 residential burglaries and 1 commercial break-in in the area. The pattern in every residential case was the same. He targeted homes and apartments at night. He chose places where he believed the occupants were alone or asleep. In 1987, Lee broke into an apartment in Keene, New Hampshire, about 80 miles west of Portsmouth. A woman was asleep inside. He forced his way in at approximately 3:30 in the morning and sexually assaulted her while she slept. She woke up screaming, roused her roommate, and Lee fled. He was eventually caught and arrested. Forced entry. The nighttime hours. A woman alone. A sexual assault during the break-in. The crime was nearly identical to what had happened on Chapel Street 6 years before. No one connected the two cases at the time. No one would connect them for decades. Lee was convicted of the Keene sexual assault and sentenced to prison in December of 1987. He served less than 3 full years and was released in July of 1990. New Hampshire did not begin requiring convicted felons to submit DNA samples until later, and the timing of Lee's conviction and release fell completely outside that window. He walked out of the state prison system without his DNA ever being collected. He passed through without leaving a single trace in any database anywhere. For the next 15 years, Lee lived in the community without drawing serious attention from law enforcement. He died on February 9, 2005, at 45 years old. The medical examiner ruled his death an accidental cocaine overdose. An autopsy was conducted, a blood card was collected as a matter of standard procedure, and it was filed away in a drawer. Ronnie James Lee was buried in early 2005. No one had ever connected him to Chapel Street. No one had ever asked him a single question about Laura Kempton. The Keene case file and the Portsmouth case file sat in separate departments in separate parts of the state, and the pattern linking them, the same man, the same method, years apart, had gone unrecognized for more than 2 decades. On July 20, 2023, the New Hampshire Attorney General's Office and the Portsmouth Police Department held a joint press conference. Attorney General John Formella and Police Chief Mark Newport stood before reporters and announced that a man named Ronnie James Lee had been identified, through DNA evidence, as the person responsible for the sexual assault and murder of Laura Kempton on Chapel Street in September of 1981. The announcement came 42 years after the crime. 18 years after Lee's death. Chief Newport addressed the room. Laura was a victim of an unspeakable act of violence. Attorney General Formella spoke directly to Laura's family. It is my hope that this conclusion and announcement will be the long-awaited first step in providing what closure the criminal justice system can provide for Laura Kempton's family and community. Assistant Attorney General Rachel Harrington was direct about the strength of the case. If Ronnie Lee were still alive today, the Attorney General's office would bring criminal charges against him for Laura Kempton's death. Investigators said they would have sought first-degree murder charges for knowingly causing Laura's death before, during, or after the commission of aggravated felonious sexual assault. Formella called it a bittersweet day. But he said the outcome carried a message for every family still waiting on a case gone cold in the state of New Hampshire. We will never stop working these cases. We will never forget about these victims. The Kempton family released a written statement through the department. The Kempton family wishes to express our deepest gratitude to the Portsmouth Police Department for solving Laura's case. Their diligence and determination, along with extraordinary personal commitment over the past decades, have led to this moment for Laura. Then Formella was asked about Tammy Little, the 20-year-old Portsmouth beauty school student found beaten to death in her own apartment just 13 months after Laura, in a crime so similar that the public and investigators alike had long wondered whether the same killer was responsible. Formella said the case remains under active investigation. He said there is currently no evidence connecting Ronnie James Lee to Tammy Little's death. But he said he hoped the announcement about Laura's case might bring forward new information about Tammy's. That case remains open. That family is still waiting. A beauty school student walking home alone on a Saturday night in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. A ground-floor apartment on Chapel Street. A wooden door panel punched through in the middle of the night. A hand reaching through the darkness to turn the lock. And a single cigarette but left on the floor next to her body. That cigarette sat in a sealed evidence bag for 42 years. The saliva on its filter held a name that no detective in the world could read, not in 1981, not for another 4 full decades. When the science finally caught up, it pointed to a man who had been dead for nearly 2 decades. Buried without a single person ever having connected him to the door he broke down on Chapel Street. Ronnie James Lee lived another 24 years after the night he killed Laura Kempton. He committed a nearly identical crime in another city 6 years later and served less than 3 years in prison for it. He spent the rest of his life in the community, drawing no serious attention, until he died of a cocaine overdose in 2005 at the age of 45. He took with him whatever accounting he might have given for what he did. Laura Kempton's family got a name. They got an explanation for what happened to their daughter on the night of September the 27th, 1981. They got the knowledge that investigators had never closed that file, had never stopped looking, had never moved on. What they did not get and what they knew, when it was finally over, they never would get was their day in a courtroom. If this case stayed with you, leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe, and if you have any information about the unsolved murder of Tammy Little, please contact Seacoast Crime Stoppers at 603-431-1199.